Hello, everybody, and welcome to another wonderful day of chemistry. So today we're going to start talking about gases. So specifically, we're going to look at what are the important features and properties of a gas with some specific focus on how they differ from solids or liquids. Now, one of the first important things to remember is that gasoline is not a gas. So let's go ahead and kind of start with the big feature of why do we care about gases? One of the reasons why is that it turns out that gases show up all over the place in chemical reactions. And one of the reasons why they specifically are fairly important to monitor is that they tend to be the most mobile of all the chemical reactants, because it turns out it's a lot easier for a gas to move around and participate in a chemical reaction than it is for a liquid, and way more than as a solid. So as a result, they tend to get in pernicious places and participate in a lot of reactions. And it does include a fair number of species. So some of the more common ones are your classic diatomic molecules. So these are your second row elements: nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, as well as a couple others like chlorine. Now, one of the reasons why these particular species are quite important is that it turns out that most of the atmosphere is made of nitrogen and oxygen. So if you're looking at a lot of environmental processes, these are going to be the big two. And it turns out fluorine and chlorine tend to play a role in a lot of things, such as cleaning products. But especially as we start going into biological processes, having a good understanding of nitrogen and oxygen interaction is really important, as a lot of biological systems rely on high levels of these two gases. However, not too high, as oxygen can start becoming poisonous. But biology ends up using a lot of other gas phase molecules as part of their processes. So carbon monoxide is often a toxic byproduct of a lot of reactions. CO2 is a necessary reagent for plants and a deadly byproduct for animals. We also have hydrogen sulfide, which is a cool byproduct of metabolism in a lot of swampy areas, as well as methane and ammonia, which are produced in a lot of the same processes. As well as all three of these can be used as fuels for various microbial metabolism. And you also have any number of other molecules which are produced and consumed in small amounts, like HCl and some other acidic species. So these are molecules that are constantly cycling around us, always participating in reactions, because they're always getting into weird places where cool reactions can take place. And so to understand a lot of chemical systems, we have to understand how these gases move in and out, because they're going to control a lot of other processes. So, for example, if we're looking at oxidation, it's really important to know how oxygen is produced and consumed. So in order to kind of track these behaviors, we first want to go ahead and focus in on some of the key properties of gases that differentiate them from what I'm going to call condensed phases. So a condensed phase is pretty much any phase where you have a high concentration of molecules. So think about things like liquids and solids. You know, they're things that are easy to poke, prod, and touch. They are condensed, as gases like steam will condense to form liquids and solids. So one of the biggest features of gases is that if I go ahead and I put them into a new container, they'll always expand till they occupy the complete volume of their container. If I go ahead and try and pour liquid into a container, well, it will occupy the exact amount of volume that that liquid had. So you can't spontaneously make water expand. Gases can, and that gives a huge advantage. So you'll always be able to generate new volume from a given amount of gas. On the converse side, it's also possible to reduce the volume of a gas, and this is called being compressible. And this is one of the defining features of a gas, because if I try and take a condensed phase, the whole idea is that these condensed phases already have small distances in between their involved molecules, so I can't shorten those distances anymore. However, gases by their very nature have lots of small molecules running around in a big space. So it's very easy to condense or compress these molecules to make them fit into a smaller volume. And associated with these large distances between molecules is the fact that gases have a much lower density than liquids or solids because there's such large separation between the molecules, which means there is a very low abundance of gases in these systems, much lower concentrations than you're going to get in even the lowest density liquid. And one of the other cool things is if I have a sample that is made just of gases, it turns out they're going to always form a homogeneous solution. The only way to get a heterogeneous solution out of gases is if you have liquids or solids present. That will generate things like smoke or steam. But otherwise, gases will perfectly mix with each other. And one of the reasons why is that gas molecules are already so far apart and tend to interact so poorly that they just don't see each other. So they say, oh, somebody else is in here? Cool, whatevs. And that's what makes the homogeneous solution. If nobody sees each other, then there's no reason to separate. And this is, again, a very cool feature that we'll make use of periodically throughout this chapter. Now, we're going to try and build up a good quantitative description of gases in this chapter. So as a result, it's very important to know what the properties of a gas are that we can quantify. So a good place to start with is this idea that gases are made of individual molecules running around in a container at high speeds. And this will generate several key properties. The first of which is pressure. So pressure in a gas sense is going to be exactly kind of what it sounds like. It's the amount of pressure or force that the gas has whenever it impacts with another material. So if you put out your hand, there is little gas molecules exerting a small amount of pressure on your hand. Most of the time, this pressure is so low, we tend not to think about it or even see it, but it helps that we're surrounded by it all the time. So it makes it easier to ignore. Another very important phenomenon that you're, again, probably familiar with the word, but haven't thought about it in this way is temperature. So temperature turns out to just be an amount of energy of a system. Specifically, when we're looking at a gas, it's going to be related to the velocity of the individual molecules flying around. The higher the temperature, the faster the gas molecules move. And we'll look at this in a lot more detail in the next two lectures. Then we have the volume. So the size of the container that I place in, and related to this is going to be the mass or moles, simply some sort of measure of how much of the gas is present. Now, one of the very important things to keep in mind is that both volume and mass and moles, all three of these are, well, they're size intensive properties. They depend on how much of the substance I have. However, if I'm looking at a system like an atmosphere, it's going to be a lot more useful to look at size extensive properties. So properties that don't matter exactly how much I have, but essentially accommodate the same idea. So these are going to be things like density, which is going to be the mass per volume of the gas, as well as the molarity, which would be the moles per volume. So both of these will tell me essentially how compressed the gas is, how essentially dense these molecules are as they run around the system. And what we're going to be doing is trying to examine exactly what we mean when we're talking about these properties, and then slowly trying to relate these to each other. So the next time, we're going to go ahead and look at a gas system from a molecular point of view as we look at how these molecules fly around. Until then, take care.